Intelligence is knowing that Frankenstein was the doctor. Wisdom is knowing that Frankenstein was the monster. Anonymous. All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. Hey, while you're here, do me a favor, folks. If you like this show, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button. And for the really serious folks out there, I want you to hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. All right, so let's get on. What do we got today? I'm going to be discussing a debate that I watched by Jubilee Media. Now, Jubilee Media, if you're not familiar, they describe themselves as, let's see, where is their image here? Let's see. Let's put this right up on the screen just so that you can see it. They describe themselves as a digital media company that pushes boundaries, tackles taboos, and breaks the rules. We believe discomfort and conflict are pivotal forces in creating human connection. In short, we're not afraid to go there. All right. So what does all this mean? Well, what Jubilee does is they put out various conversations in different formats, and that creates different video series. So the one that I saw, it has one individual that's surrounded by 20 opponents, and they have multiple resolutions with about 20 minutes each for each resolution. And so what you have that one individual who is like, they have, a particular view and the other 20 oppose it. And then they break that up and they say, all right, here's multiple resolutions. So they say they'll make a claim. And then there are 20 minutes for people to debate that claim, for all the opponents to debate the claim with the individual. And so the way that it works is that they're sitting in the middle and they have 20 people surrounding them. And the once they determine that, hey, it's time for somebody to go up, everybody makes a dash to the chair, or not everybody, but anybody that wants to come up and debate this particular comment, or they had something that they wanted to say. And so then the clock starts, and then the rest of the opponents, while they're sitting there listening, they can raise a red flag when they want to hear somebody else. And then once a majority of flags have been raised, that signals that the current opponent must leave. And at that time, the timer is paused, and then the dash starts again, and then the timer continues. And when the clock runs out, they move on to the next resolution. So what I want to do is I want to first start with this viral clip, which kind of got me here. Like, what is it that, because I don't necessarily, I mean, I've told people this before, that I don't necessarily watch other podcasts because I don't generally have time. So I have to kind of like carve out time in order to do that. So here's this clip that kind of got me going down this path in the first place. So let's take a look. This is clip number one, and we'll play it. I may not play the whole clip because I've got 4 different clips, and I want to make sure that we get everything in time, so that we don't run too long of an episode. Now, I will say this. The show that I watched was like an hour and 45 minutes or so. I couldn't possibly review the entirety of it, so I'm going to review as much as I can. And I did split it up into part 1 and part 2. And the reason for that is the majority of the show is the format that I described to you. But then at the very end, after the single individual has debated a bunch of opponents, they get to choose, okay, who do I want to debate for the last 10 minutes of the show? And then that opponent, they get to decide what the resolution is. So initially, the individual says, I believe this, and then people can come up, debate them. And then after that plays out several times, then what you have is they pick somebody and they say, person, number 1, I really like debating them. I'd like to debate them further. And then person number 1 will come up and they will state their resolution, and then they debate for 10 minutes. So let's play this clip and we'll see where we go with it.
Kamala Harris would be a much better president than Donald Trump. Welcome in.
Hi.
Hi. So you mind if I give you my reasons why I think that Harris would be a better president?
If you want.
Yeah, so there's two main categorical reasons why I say Harris would be better than Trump. The first category is character. The second category is policy. Let's start off with character. First of all, Trump is a felon. Trump is a fraudster. Trump is an election denier. He's a dictator on day one, wannabe fascist. Okay. Kamala Harris is none of those. Kamala Harris wants to protect and preserve a democracy. She wants to fight for the freedoms of all Americans, especially the 170 million American women and girls. And then we could reference policy next. If you want to respond to character, go for it. If you want me to hop straight into policy, I could do that too.
Well, starting with character, I technically do not think she's a good person. Speaking of which, if we're bringing up stuff from the past, we can say she slept with Willie Brown, broke up a family just to get her job.
Okay, so I want to pause it here for just a moment. We're gonna, in this particular clip, I will evaluate some of their claims. But then after that, the next clips, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the debate strategy, if you will, because this whole episode was really about him being anti-Trump and them being pro-Trump. And you can watch it in the show notes. I encourage you to go watch it and check it out. It was actually an interesting watch, but that's the basis of it. And I'm not going to sit here and fact check it because, well, I don't want to come across as supporting Trump because I'm not a Trump supporter. But I did think the video was interesting to watch, just kind of to hear what people's thoughts are on different matters and then also how they debate under pressure. So, because these aren't formal debates in the context where, one person gets up and says, they have like 10 minutes to, for their opening statement. Then the next person has 10 minutes. And then they kind of have this very structured back and forth. And then the audience votes to determine who is the winner at the end. That's not really how this is. This is more of a, you sit down and I don't know what the rules are, if there were any, but it seemed like it was just, people being able to sit down and argue, kind of like you might do with your friends who come over to your house. So let's continue.
And while she was there, she used a firm that was putting people in jail that had false positives on drug tests. And she knew they had false positives. She admitted to that. And she was still putting mainly Black and brown people in jail, considering I'm both. That is very much a big issue for me. And also that a woman shouldn't represent, they should just sleep to the top for their job. They should actually work hard for it. I generally don't think that she's a good representative. There's plenty of other women out there.
Yeah, I have a question. How many votes did she get in a run for AG? Do you know? How many votes did she get in a run?
We're talking about character, though.
Of course.
We'll talk about character and morals. And if we're mentioning character and morals here, she's clearly not a good person.
Okay, I'm responding to your
just claim. Like you had mentioned all that stuff about Trump, which could be true.
I'm referencing your claim that she
family.
I'm referencing your claim that she slept to the top. How many votes did she get when she was running for AG and DA in the state of California?
But that has nothing to do with the fact.
It does. She got 4.5 million votes in total. 80 million for her run for AG or DA. I don't remember which one. And then 4.4 million for the other one. I have a question. You're saying that she slept her way to the top. How many of those 4.5 million people that voted for her did she have to sleep with?
Well, obviously we're in California and this is pretty corrupt, but to say that she needed the votes of most people that matter, which is the person she slept with, could actually overturn and hide these votes just like they did with the election. But
listen, the idea that women have to sleep with men to get into positions
and that's exactly what she
is
did.
a misogynistic lie.
One
moment.
She's saying that.
Do you mind if I finish talking real quick?
We have to open our legs to get jobs. That's exactly how she used it.
Do you mind if I just finish talking real quick?
Okay, so I want to pause here again. So you can see where it's starting to get a little bit tense, right? He's like, hey, I want to talk, and she's talking over him. And I want to point out something here. Just so that it's clear, and let me navigate away. When I first saw this clip, I looked at it and I was like, a lot of people were like, man, he just, he took her to task. He, ran right over her. She totally didn't know what she was talking about, blah, blah. And when I saw it, my first thought was like, man, this dude's a jerk. He's like talking over her. In fact, here's what I said. Let me put that up. Where did it go? Where's my, there we go. So let's get here. So this is what I said. And this is where the tweet that I first saw. And this is a guy named Victor Shee. He said, this guy's name is Dean Withers. He's 20 years old and he's tearing down racist, misogynistic, and totally false claims about Kamala Harris, one far right Republican at a time. Take some time to watch this. It's so amazing. And then what I said was, you mean he's talking over a woman and shifting the argument. Why is it's not all the way on the screen? Shifting the argument from one of morals to one of votes. he did so because he has no respect for women he disagrees with, and to weasel out of acknowledging his argument um, applies to his also applies to his preferred candidate as well. So that was my initial impression just by watching this. But again, this is the reason why I encourage people to not go solely by a clip that you see on the internet, because in this particular case, I didn't realize exactly the nature of this particular show. I just saw this one little clip, and it sounds like he's just talking over this woman and just being very disrespectful, when in reality, that's kind of the nature of the whole show. And if you watch the entirety of it, you'll find that it happens back and forth. Now, because he is, he's the lone guy against 20 Trump supporters, it makes sense that he would be very, very knowledgeable. It wouldn't make sense if he came into the show as equally knowledgeable as all 20 other people. I mean, I guess it would if he was really good at debating, but these appear to me to be very like normal, everyday, casual people, not people who debate necessarily for a living. And I believe he said that he debates for a living. I think he said that at the very beginning of the show. So, in some sense, it's almost like a bunch of people who are average everyday folk are getting their shot at somebody who does this on the regular and has some practice and has been studying this information and has a lot of facts and figures, that he is reviewed and prepared for. So he is, and that makes sense. Like you would kind of expect that, right? So that was my initial impression, and it was kind of wrong in a sense, because everybody was doing it. So like, okay, not nearly as bad. So let's go back to the video and let's continue on and we'll see. So let's see. I might have to restart.
Kamala Harris would be a much better.
Hold on. Let's go back to where we were. So we were right about here.
She's saying that.
Do you mind if I finish talking real quick?
We have to open our legs to get jobs. That's exactly how she used it.
Do you mind if I just finish talking real quick? Also, I would like to finish out this conversation. There's a lot of red flags up, though. So saying that women have to sleep with men to get into positions of power is a misogynistic lie. What you are doing? That.
She just did that.
One moment.
That's what she represents.
What you are doing? What you are doing is you are taking Kamala Harris. You are taking her character. You are taking her proposed policy. You are taking her intelligence, and you're taking her wisdom, and you're throwing it out of the window. Because when you say that the only reason she's in her position of power today is because she slept with a man that had been legally divorced for 3 years is a lie. She got 4.5 million votes to get into AG and DA and slept with 0 of them. The question I have for you,
you don't
is
know
how
that,
do you feel about Donald
Trump? Do you know that? No.
Okay,
absolutely
so
not.
you think that she slept with 4.5 million people to get in her position of power?
But the one
Wait, are you serious?
Was the most important person.
Did you just say that she had to?
That's kind of a wild statement to make. I'm sure she could have. I mean, I guess I'm not really sure how I'm not sure how Kamala Harris could have slept with 4.5 million people. But that's, so this again, these aren't necessarily polished people who have been doing this. So I just kind of wanted to point that out. And I thought that was kind of a humorous thing. Not really something that you would really want to focus on in the middle of a debate. But, it's humorous to laugh at in the aftermath watching it later.
Sleep with 4.5 million people?
I didn't say that. I said that she slept with one of the most relevant people to get her job.
What was his name?
Get in. Willie Brown.
And how did sleeping with Willie Brown get her the 4.5 million votes in a run for AG&DA?
Because he was in the same position she needed to get.
But we have civil electoral processes. We are a constitutional republic with democratic processes. Yes, I do. And you're saying that she somehow circumvented these civil electoral processes?
I don't hate women, guys. Just letting you know.
All right. So she doesn't hate women, which was that's an interesting remark. It kind of came across to me as if she was, because she said, I don't hate women. And why would you make that kind of a comment as you're leaving? It kind of feels like, from my perspective, that she felt that's how she looked. Now, let's talk about some of the facts and figures, and then we're going to move on and we're going to play some of the actual clips and talk about like more of the debate strategy rather than the facts and figures, just because I thought it was interesting, because I was curious to look some of these up, and I was like, okay, well, did Kamala Harris sleep with a man named Willie Brown? Did he in some way assist her in getting her position? So let's take a look here. Let's see what we can find. So it looks like, boom, here we go. Reuters, first and foremost, Reuters points out here that Kamala Harris did have a relationship with Willie Brown, and that was between 1994 and 1995. they linked to a bunch of sources from back at that time that reported on this. Okay. So the Los Angeles Times first linked the pair in 1994. So she did have a relationship. And then at the time, and this is a 1994 article. So this isn't an article that was written today, because I know a lot of people get very skeptical and they're like, oh, well, of course it was written like that today to cover for her. Nope, this article does come from, I'm sorry, this is a, let me rephrase that. This is a more recent Reuters article that is linking to other articles that were written at the time that discussed these issues. Let me make sure I'm clear on this. So then it goes on. It says, although Brown was legally married at the time, he had reportedly been estranged from his wife, Blanche Brown, since 1981. So it was actually more like 10 years that not three, he was actually 10 years that he was separated from his wife. And then let's see, Harris and Brown broke up in 1995. A reporter wrote in the daily column that the couple had split, adding, quote, the news came as a shock to many, including those who found Kamala Harris attractive, intelligent, and charming. So there is truth that she had a relationship with somebody named Willie Brown. And it is also true that Brown did appoint her to two roles: the Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board and the California Medical Assistance Commission. So now the question is, did that leg up, did that help her win her elections? Well, I'm going to say it didn't. Okay. Now, you guys know I'm not a fan of Kamala Harris, nor am I a fan of Donald Trump. I have no intention and will not be voting for either one of them. However, I'm also not a fan of getting the facts wrong, right? Like, we need to evaluate the facts as they are. So here, let's take a look at Kamala Harris's election history. So this is very interesting. This comes from Wikipedia. I know. But let me just make this point. I checked the original sources, and the original sources have this information. The original sources come from like the supervisor of elections and the government that tallied up all of these votes. So this information is legitimate, and I would have used the original source information, but the way they put it together was not as nice and tidy. And I was like, nah, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to use the Wikipedia, and I have validated that this information is correct. So let's take a look. And so what do we see here? We see that in 2003, which is what appears to be her first election, she won her primary, or she didn't win the primary, but she advanced in the primary. Right. So we see that she got 33% of the vote versus Terrence, who is the incumbent at the time, who got 35, almost 36% of the vote. And then we see that in 2003, when they had the runoff, that she actually beat Terrence 56% to 43%. So she got 137,000 votes. So this was in 2003. So this is now 8 years after her relationship with Willie Brown. It's a hard argument to make that 8 years later, this relationship that she had gave her an assist in the election. So Dean is correct in saying that, hey, we went through this process. She was voted in, and even though she might have slept with somebody and got a little leg up back in 1994, 1995, that doesn't necessarily guarantee her a win in her election. But then we go forward, and we can see that she goes on in 2007. She wins with 98%. I kind of would exclude this one because she was running against a write-in. There was nobody running against her. She was the incumbent, and she could have got 12%, presumably 12% of the vote. And if the write-in didn't get any more, then unless the rules state that she has to have like some certain percentage. Oh, you know what? That wouldn't even make sense. She would always, no, I take it back. Let me rephrase that. She couldn't have possibly gotten 12%. I don't know why I said that. It's too early in the morning. I had caffeine, I promise you. But anyway, I would discard this one simply because there was nobody running against her. When nobody runs against you, you can't help but win. And what I was trying to get at was, even if the vote count had been much, much lower, percentage wise, she still would have won. So she could have gotten like 50 votes. And as long as she got more votes than the write-in, let's say the write-in got 1 and she got 50, she still would have won. Okay, because she would have had the highest percentage. because again, there was nobody running against her. So that's what I meant. That's the direction I meant to go in. Misspoke there. All right. So then we continue on because her election history is not done. In 2010, you can see that in the general primary, she got 33%, whereas the next Democrat got 15%, and then another 15%, and then a 10%, and so on and so forth. So she advanced to the next round. In the next round, she runs as the Democrat for 2010 for the California Attorney General. This is the 4.5 million votes that Dean was referencing. And you can see that it was a pretty tight race between her and Steve Cooley. But she did win, getting 46.1% of the vote against Steve Cooley, who got 45.3%. So she did win. Now, this is 2010 now. So remember, the relationship that she had with Willie Brown was in 1994 and 1995. And she goes on to continually win in the election. And it is like you would be making it's a hard case to make that in 2010, she's her sleeping with Willie Brown in 1994 was still giving her an advantage. Okay. I just have to give it to him. Like, that's just the truth. So then we go to 2014, and we see that in this primary, she got 53% of the vote, with the Republican behind her at 12%. So they advanced to the next round and to the general election. And in that general election, she got 57% of the vote compared to 42% of the vote. And let's see, we got a couple more images here. So then in 2016, this is where she's winning her Senate election. So she got 30, or I'm sorry, the primary. She got 39, almost 40% compared to almost 19% by Loretta. And then in the general, she goes on and she wins with 61% compared to 38%. So as far as I'm concerned, Dean's facts do match up, right? He is correct in saying that that Kamala Harris didn't necessarily sleep her way to the top, or at least, more importantly, that has not been demonstrated. And if you're going to make an argument, you have to have the facts and demonstrate it. So if you want to say, hey, this person has slept their way to the top, well, then you have to say, you have to show that they slept with person A, and person A got them a position, and then they slept with person B, and person B got them this next position, and then person C that they slept with got them to the next level, and so on and so forth. However high the top ends up being, but that was not demonstrated. Now, I will criticize Dean because he conflates criticism of Harris sleeping her way to the top with all women. The argument here is specific to Kamala Harris, and it's not all women. And the claim is honestly just simply incorrect. It's not necessarily misogyny. And so I will criticize Dean for saying that, because he's like, well, look, this is misogynistic. Not necessarily. You can make a claim and just simply be wrong. And this is probably one of the biggest issues that we have when it comes to debate in this country. Somebody makes a claim about something or somebody, and then someone else fires back and says, well, that's racist, that's sexist, that's blah, blah, blah. Well, not necessarily so. I mean, in this particular case, it is the fact that Kamala Harris did have a relationship with somebody else. And it is a fact that likely because of that relationship, in some way, she did get a couple of positions. Okay. But that doesn't necessarily mean that she slept her way to the top any more than pointing it out is and exaggerating the claim is misogynistic, or any other words along that line. So these are the kind of things that we need to be mindful of. And this is why I think it might actually be good to watch these kind of shows so that you get an idea of, good and bad arguments. Watch a debate, say, all right, what was a good argument, and evaluate it, right? Like, evaluate it as neutrally as you can. Right now, if you're a super duper Trump supporter, then you might find some of these arguments more appealing. If you're opposed to Trump and you're a really big Kamala Harris supporter, you might find these very objectionable, and that's fine. But if you're going to learn anything from these kind of videos, which I think you should, then you have to approach them as objective as you can and say, okay, what did this person get right? What did this person get wrong? All right. So now let's do this. Let's see here. What do we got here? I'm gonna look at some comments real quick before I lose sight of them. Let's see here. Absolutely. So, time surfing alien points out lots of other things to criticize her for without resorting to exaggerated claims. I agree. There are plenty, and this it's funny because probably since Obama, and that's when I really, really started paying more close attention to politics. Um, that's when I started becoming more and more frustrated because I started noticing that people were exaggerating, and they were exaggerating claims left and right, and I mean on the left and right, but also left and right. Like it was just rampant, and it's really frustrating because I'm like, okay, that's not even a good argument, nor does it matter. And that's what people want to talk about. And I'm like, that's not, there's nothing of substance there. So if we want to get the best people in office, then it's it's the onus is on us to ensure that we're actually having meaningful debates about things of substance. If we're all arguing about whether or not Kamala Harris slept her way to the top because she one time had a relationship with somebody back in 1994. I mean, think about how long ago that was. It's like 20 years ago. I'm sorry, 30 years ago, right? 30 years ago, she had this relationship, and we're like, yeah, that's the only reason she's, able to make it to be president. I mean, a lot happens in 30 years, folks. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to move on to these next few clips, and I'm not going to fact check them because again, that's not what interests me out of this particular show. It's like, what can we learn from this show? So, a couple things here. Number one, I've got 3 clips. I'm going to play these clips at sped up pace so that we fit everything in the time that we're trying to do this show in. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna talk about kind of my observation of the interaction between the two. So let's play this next clip here and let's see what we can learn from it. Now, yeah, we'll just play it. There we go.
Okay. I guess what I want to
Ooh.
start with is looking at the actual word racist. I think
All right, let me let me speed. Let me slow that. That's a little fast. That's gonna annoy me. I didn't realize it was gonna be that fast.
okay.
There.
I guess what I want to start with is looking at the actual word racist. I think nowadays it's a word that people throw around kind of like the word love. It is a very powerful word. It has a lot of negative connotation. It has a lot of power that comes with it. When I think of racist, I think of Hitler, who murdered millions of Jews. When I think of racist, I think of the Ottoman Turks that murdered 1.5 million of my people. I think of that. I don't think of Trump, who maybe he said things in the past, this or that. If we want to go about talking about saying things, Biden said Obama is one of the first mainstream blacks to be bright and intelligent. He said that you can only walk into a 7-Eleven if you have an Indian accent. He has said that if you vote for Trump over him, you're not black. He said so many of these things in his past, and the prompt is talking about, is Trump racist? But to me, it's not about that because of how the media has displayed racism. They just focus on Trump, and it is about both sides. They don't touch upon Biden. They don't talk about Biden. And when you look at his policies, like my friend mentioned, if Trump was a racist, he would not be passing policies. He wouldn't even give $1 to these black universities. If he truly had this, it's an intention of the heart. And I'll go out and I'll step out and say, I'm sure everybody here has said something racist in their life. That doesn't make you a racist. It's kind of like if you weigh 400 pounds and you eat celery, you're not skinny. All these examples that you're talking about are from years and years ago. What has he done that's racist in the last maybe 5-10 years?
Okay, so let's pause it for just a second here. Hopefully that doesn't sound too weird to you guys. I know it's a little squeaky there, but that's okay. So I want to point out that at this particular moment in time, the resolution is Donald Trump is a racist. So at the beginning of this particular 20-minute segment, Dean announces or states, his viewpoint, and then everybody gets to come up and they debate it. So he says Donald Trump is a racist, and then everybody gets to rush up and they follow the standard format. And so this guy sits down and he immediately starts debating. Now, what's interesting about that is he hasn't asked why, like the man in red has not asked why Dean believes Donald Trump is a racist. And I think that's a mistake because if I make a claim, right, if it's a fact-based claim that we can argue about whether the facts bear out, like if I said Donald Trump only got this many votes. Okay, well, that's something we can go and we can look up and say, what does the evidence specifically say? Right? This is an evidence-based claim, and it's one that we can go back and we can look at information and we can have a conversation based on that. And so, in that particular case, I think it would be reasonable to say I believe, that's not correct. Here's why, because such and such reported, blah, blah, blah. Right. But in this particular case, this is more of, somebody's personal perspective. And so this isn't something that has a very objective standard because again, what does it mean to be racist? Why is this? Why do you believe this particular person is racist? What do you mean when you say racism? Right. And now I will say the man in red sits down and immediately goes into saying, well, so I didn't like that he immediately went into it without asking. Like, okay, no big deal. But I will say he does a good job coming in and saying, all right, look, here's where I'm coming from when I see racism. This is what I think it means. Now, I'm not a big fan of his definition because his definition was about events. He was like, I'm thinking of like Hitler and the Ottomans, the Ottoman Empire. And those are the problem with doing that is that you tie your view of racism to specific events. And these happen to be very big events. So then the question becomes, well, how do we apply that to average everyday life? Right. Like if we want to say, because racism is something that can happen at a macro scale, with Hitler and the Ottomans. It can also happen at the micro scale. Me in the grocery store with one other person, right? So how do we have a consistent definition of racism that can be applied to all of those situations? And so I think that's where he misses the mark. So let's continue and let's hear what Dean has to say.
10 years ago, 2014, Trump was actively proponing Barack Obama's birther myth, the idea that he was not born in. But you already said that example. Give me something new, because that's okay. Fine, yeah, sure. I mean, you're asking for some of the last 5 to 10 years. That was 10 years ago. I thought that I'd just go over that again. Okay. Another reason why I wanted to go over that again with you is because how intuitively racist it is, right? Denying or saying that a black man should have less opportunity because of the color of his skin is very obviously racist. When did he make that comment? Yeah. So the whole.
So I think this is great. That was a great response. So Dean says, in fact, let's just back it up again. I want to listen to it. Just there we go.
That a black man should have less opportunity because of the color of his skin is very obviously racist. When did he?
Okay. So he's like, look, if you say that a black man should have less opportunity because of the color of skin, that's very racist. So the original comment is that Donald Trump is a racist. And so then this man correctly asked him, he says, okay, well, wait a minute. When did Trump actually say that? And what he means is like that. When did he say, you're black, you can't have other opportunities? And that's a relevant question. The thing that we miss out on when we're debating is asking questions. We need to learn to ask more questions when we are debating, because more questions allows you to better understand where your opponent is coming from, and it better allows you to respond in a meaningful way. So let's continue on because I like kind of how this ends.
Make that comment. Yeah. So the whole birther myth with Barack Obama, right, essentially hoped to achieve that he wasn't born in the U.S. He was born in Kenya. And because he's not a U.S. born citizen, he shouldn't have the opportunity to run for U.S. president. The only reason he said that is because of the color of Barack Obama's skin.
Okay. So this is very interesting because by asking the question, by this man in red asking Dean this question, it causes Dean to open up. When you get your opponent to open up, you can start understanding, okay, what are the elements of your argument? What are the things that led you to hold this particular position? And when you find those things out, then you can start addressing them. And you can either say, you know what, I agree with you, that I believe that what you're saying is true and that does make sense. And then you can go forward from there and maybe you find a little bit of common ground. Or you say, whoa, wait a minute. You're making this claim, but it's based on some information that is not correct. So let's back up and let's address this, what you might think of as being the incorrect information. So that I think asking questions has a significant value when you're in a debate like this. And when I say like this, I mean where it's not structured necessarily.
I would like has he explicitly said he said that specifically because he's black, or are you just taking that assumption? Okay.
Right. So then he follows it up and he's like, all right, did he actually say that? Or are you imposing that perspective upon him? Because he said, hey, this man's illegitimate. And one argument that you could make is to say it had nothing to do with the color of his skin. It had everything to do with, hey, are you legitimately eligible to run for this particular role. And the role of president does have very specific requirements, one of them being that you are a native born American. So this was a great way to approach this from the man in red. And then I like this is the last few seconds. We'll check this out.
So what else? What explanation do we have here? I've said everything I need to say. I'm waiting on you.
Okay. So he's like, look, I said everything I need to say because he was the one asking questions. So he kind of took a little bit of control of the conversation. And it's not about having control of the conversation. I think the conversation goes back and forth. In one moment, I have the control. Next moment, my opponent does. And we kind of go back and forth. And when you have control of the conversation, it's a matter of what do you do with it? Do you ask questions? Do you make sure that you say, hey, wait a minute. No, I don't have to answer that. You have to answer that. You made the claim. Now you need to back it up with substantive information. Right. So I think that was a great exchange. I really liked it from both of them. Actually, I don't have an issue necessarily with either one of them because it's a very common, it could be a very common exchange that we see between two individuals, because there will be times where maybe if somebody inquires of me that once we start breaking down why I believe what I believe, that maybe I have to come to terms with some things. We're not all always correct, as much as we might like to believe that we are. Okay, so let's move on to this next individual. So this individual, she and I slowed it. I didn't slow it down, or I didn't speed it up as much. So hopefully it doesn't sound too weird. So this next individual, she does almost an entirely opposite approach. So she doesn't sit down and they're not having this question and back and forth. So let's play this because I thought this was very interesting.
All right. So you said that Democrats are more patriotic than Republicans?
Yes, because
Okay, so let's pause here for just a second. Sorry to keep pausing on you guys. So now we're at a different resolution. The last one was, hey, Donald Trump is a racist. And so then that's the question that's the resolution that they're addressing. Now the resolution, and you can kind of see it up on the top of the screen, it says Democrats are more patriotic than Republicans. So this is Dean's resolution that everybody gets to come up and they get to debate him on. So this is what she sits down. She says, okay, you said this, so let's explore it.
Oh, okay. I would like to hear. So how would you describe the epic failure with the Biden administration? And how would you see it as being patriotic in the way that we left Afghanistan?
Okay, so she does the same thing. She sits down, but instead of not asking Dean, she sits down and just dives right in and says, hey, well, if you think that this group is more patriotic than this group, then what do you got to say about this? Now, the problem with that is, again, we haven't established what does it mean for one to be more patriotic than the other? What do you mean when you say patriotism? Because if you watch the show, you'll notice that people have varying degrees of what it means to be patriotic. If you ask one person, say, what does it mean to be patriotic? They might say, well, patriotic means that when we play the Star Spangled Banner, that everybody stands up, they take their hat off and they put the hand on their heart and they sing along, right? That's what some people would say. Other people might say, well, I think it's patriotic that you kneel if you need to bring attention to an issue with your fellow Americans. Okay, we had that argument in this country. And so people are going to have different views on what it means to be patriotic. And again, most people, when you ask them, what does it mean? They will resort to an example. And the better thing to do is to think in your mind, okay, what do I mean when I say patriotism? And let me think of a generic definition that can either be applied and we can agree or disagree on any given scenario. So let's continue on because she dives right in. She's like, all right, let's talk about Afghanistan.
well, if you want to reference our Afghanistan pullout as not being patriotic, well, we should blame that on Trump because he's the one that organized the pullout.
That's actually wrong. He didn't.
He did.
I know the lawyers that worked with JAG for that operation, and it was a long strategic pullout over the course of several years. It was the Biden administration that booked when they were going to leave. It was their operation with the military complex under Austin that pulled that out. It was an epic failure. So are you agreeing that it was a failure?
Okay, well, I mean, if you've seen it.
So I do like, now, I didn't like how she initiated, but I like that she's like, all right, here are the facts. And you could see the fact check pop up and they do agree with her. She said, all right, here's the facts. And now she then asked him a question. By asking him a question, you kind of take control of the conversation because you're basically putting the onus on them to answer, to respond. Okay. So I think that was a good move on her part. But it gets a little bit spicier here as we go along.
You seemingly know more than me about the pullout from Afghanistan. As far as I'm aware, that was organized under by Trump's
Do you
administration.
see giving the Qatari embassy to the Taliban as patriotic?
Well, I would like to just finish off here real quick. So you seemingly know more than me about our pullout from Afghanistan. I was under the
Do you
impression.
see what happened at Bagram Air Force Base as patriotic?
Okay, ma'am. Do you mind if I finish? Is that
We'll
fine?
see. We'll see. We'll see if I can interrupt you. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, just what I had hoped to say there was you seemingly know more than me about our pullout out of Afghanistan.
It was one of the largest events that happened after Biden took office, and also one of what I would consider one of the worst and most humiliating for America.
Okay. Well, if I can't like finish my statements, I don't see how we're going to be able to have productive
Do
conversation.
you know how many people are left? American citizens are left in Afghanistan?
I do not know how many American citizens are left in Afghanistan.
Are you familiar with any of the planes that have gone back to try and pull some of these people out? Do you know who's operating those planes?
so-
Do you know that the federal government isn't doing that? That it's nonprofit organizations, and that a lot of those nonprofit organizations were grounded in other countries and
So she continues to question him. She's hammering him with questions and he doesn't get a chance to respond. Now the fact check does come up and again agrees with her. So, and I'm going to put this comment up on the screen here. She needs to let him finish. Typical tactics to control the conversation. You're absolutely correct. She is dominating the conversation. She's not letting him speak. So let's continue on.
allowed to enter in
Okay.
for
So
flood operations.
all right, let's look at the.
So patriotically
I
speaking,
mean, if I can't speak,
is
we're
that
not
something
gonna
that's
go on.
patriotic to you? Is leaving someone behind patriotic?
Okay. Well, if you will allow me to speak without.
I'm waiting for you.
Yeah.
You're very quick with everybody else. Come on.
If you will allow me to speak without
Okay.
interruption, we'll be able to have a hopefully productive conversation.
Wait.
Okay. Well, I'm seriously. I'm not.
Okay. So let me just pause here. She continues and she's hammering. Now she is correct and she has clearly found a weakness for him. And the problem here is what is it that you're trying to accomplish? If you just want to make for good TV, if you just want to embarrass somebody, then her tactics are perfect. That's exactly what you can do. However, keep in mind, there is likely something somewhere that he knows and is very familiar with that she is not. And so if this debate were between only her and him, then guess what? At a later point, he might be able to pull the same tactics. And so then it becomes this big race to see who can embarrass the other, which is basically all of social media, right? Like that's basically social media right there in a nutshell. So she's hammering him at her questions, and it's a great tactic. Again, if you just want something, if you want to produce something that's entertaining. But again, we're electing people to run our country. So then the question you have to ask yourself is this going to help us get the best person elected? Probably not.
Be able to make a point if you keep interrupting me. Like that's just like we
No,
gotta-
you're stalling. You're stalling. Make your point. Was it patriotic?
Okay,
That's
dude.
yes or no? Was that patriotic for you?
Okay.
Was you embarrassed
Okay,
by the
I'm
family
not.
that's in the
I'm not going to be
military?
able to give you a yes or no answer. I'm gonna have to give you a fleshed out answer. I will address your point if you
A
could.
flushed out answer. You don't have a yes or no on patriotism, leaving people
Okay.
behind Afghanistan.
So if you
the
will,
war that we spent over 20 years.
you're still not allowing me to
fighting?
talk here. Do you mind if I
I'm
finish?
waiting. Yes or no?
Well, it's not a yes or no question.
It
I
is
have
a
to
yes
give
or
you
no
a full
question. I
question.
asked you yes or no. It's very
If you
direct. Yes
if you will-
or no.
Okay, so what
Was
you're
it
trying to do is you're
patriotic?
trying to force me into a
Was
yes or no
it
question when I can't even respond to the
patriotic?
claims that you've
Was
made.
it no, you're dancing around the question because you don't want to
Okay.
answer it because
Okay.
it's going to make you look bad.
So
Okay, so let's pause it right there. I actually agree with that little portion right there where she's like, look, it's a yes or no question. Answer yes or no. Here's why I say that. I've watched debates before, like local debates and, like with, city council and stuff like that. And a lot of people do dance around the question. You'll say, hey, do you think this is right? Whatever. And that person go, well, so like blah, blah, blah. And they'll go on and they'll kind of give you this long winded answer. Right. And that allows them to evade actually saying yes or no. And so I would say take the tip that we can take from this is that always be prepared to say yes or no first. And I've watched people do it, right? They'll say, yes, now let me explain, right? And so that cuts off what how the other person might sit there and like what she's doing, hammering and saying, yeah, but it's a yes or no question. Why can't you answer it? You're just evading the question, which in many cases is what's happening. Now, whether he's doing that, whether he's trying to evade the question or get around it, it's not really as clear as she might like to believe because she hasn't given him enough time for us to determine that. she's just making that assumption that he says, he doesn't say yes or no, and then says about 3 words, and then she just dives right in and just keeps bombarding him. So we don't really know whether he's going to be evasive or not. All we know is that he can't get his comments out. So the takeaway here, be prepared to always say yes or no when it is a yes or no question. Don't be afraid of them. And I think a lot of people are. I think, politicians, because you're on the spot and the feeling is, if you say yes, if you say no, depending on the nature of the question, that's going to box you in, but not necessarily. You can say yes, but no, but yes, let me explain. No, let me explain. Yes, with a caveat. There's any number of ways that you can lead with a yes or no, and then further explain to add the nuances, because we're all adults. We all know that nuance is in everything. And so while there may be a clear-cut yes or no, that doesn't mean that there's not other information that can be added to the question, to the answer, that allows us to kind of say, okay, let's put that yes or no into perspective. All right, let's continue watching.
It was not patriotic. I think any American citizen can tell that it was not patriotic. It made us look bad. It was embarrassing. We all had doubts on what was going to happen under this administration, just based on that alone. And the fact that we still have people there, that's embarrassing.
Okay. All right. So if the Afghanistan pullout were to have occurred as the way that you described it, it would have been anti-patriotic. It would have been bad. 13 service members lost their lives. I don't think that they deserve to do that. I'm under the impression that Donald Trump had organized that pullout while he was president. It was executed under the Biden-Harris administration.
Nope.
You're saying that's false. We'll leave it up to fact checkers. And then I'd also, please, please, let me finish. Please. So sorry for cussing.
All right.
Please just allow me to finish here.
So it sounds like.
Okay. So I would still say that
So it sounds like he swore and they bleeped it out. So she got him so frustrated that he actually swore. Now, if you watch the whole video, the whole episode, you'll find out that many of the exchanges were actually very, very pleasant. They weren't contentious like this. And, they shook hands, like, hey, it was great talking to you, whatever. And I think that's the way that our conversation should be. Now, the real question here is there ever a time that kind of strategy might be of value? And the answer is yes. If you're debating an opponent who is very intelligent, has a lot of knowledge, and they're kind of abusing that, right? In the context of saying, like, they are dumping on you because they realize that maybe you're not as well informed. And so they're using information against you. Then the moment you find a weakness, that is a way to kind of deflate them a little bit, to kind of bring their ego down just a wee bit, and just to let them know that, hey, you know what? You are susceptible to not be, everybody is ignorant about something. And it's clear in this particular case that he was ignorant about this one particular thing. If you watch the whole show, he's actually very knowledgeable on a number of other things. So fair point to him for coming in, being knowledgeable, but at the end of the day, you can't know everything. And so I think there is a value to this kind. I don't think it needs to go on as long as they went. And I think it needs to be only used as a way to kind of bring somebody back down so that you can have a civil conversation. Because otherwise, some people use the fact that they know more than you to their advantage, and they could actually still be wrong. So think of it this way. Assume that you and I, and just take you as one single viewer or listener, you and I are debating a topic. And let's say that I'm very, very knowledgeable on this particular topic. And then I'm pulling out all this information. I could still be wrong. And I could use the fact that I have more knowledge to my advantage to basically beat you up, in a sense, verbally. And so that would be a time, if you found a weakness, to hammer in and be like, all right, can we now, like, we've established that both of us can go back and forth. Can we dial it back and have a productive conversation? And I think that would be a good, useful way to approach. All right. So let's look at this last, video. And this was by far my favorite. And this will be the basis of the show tomorrow, not this particular clip. This particular gentleman who came up to debate him, toward the end, when they had that last 10-minute segment, Dean chooses him to debate a particular topic. And it was very, very interesting. And we're actually going to walk through that tomorrow. But I want to play this because I thought this was a really outstanding approach. So let's watch this guy.
Good to meet you. Good to meet you as well, man. All right. So
I think your first claim, you were saying that because Donald Trump has this past and this history, that therefore he's anti-family, and then therefore the entire Republican base is anti-family.
Well,
is that your argument?
I'd like
Okay, so let's pause right there. So this is a great lead in. So first of all, conservatives don't actually care about family values is the resolution that Dean is promoting here, or Dean has stated here. And so this man sits down and he says, okay, so this is what you said. Is this what you mean by this? And then so now he's clarifying. Okay, let's be clear about what you mean so that we can have a conversation, because you can't just rush into a debate and then just make a bunch of assumptions, because you could honestly make yourself look like a fool. So this was a great start right here. Just make a statement and then follow with a question to say, it's basically saying, do I understand you correctly? Or something like, what I hear you saying is, and then you repeat what you think they are saying in using different words. And then that ensures that both of you are on the same page. Let's continue.
to make two corrections here.
Sure.
So first of all, that's not like the only reason why I'd say this. It's just like one of
It's one of your arguments.
And then
Yeah.
second of all, I wouldn't say that every conservative ever on the face of planet Earth is doesn't actually care about family values for this reason. I just say that this is going to be typically true.
Okay, so now he gets Dean to back up a little bit and say, okay, now we're not using these broad brushstrokes. Now I'm going to say it's typically true. So he gets a little bit of clarification from Dean.
Okay, so you think just because Donald Trump is the Republican candidate that therefore typically conservatives or Republicans are anti-family?
Well, I'd say the consideration of who the Republican Party is championing, Donald Trump, a consideration of like the consequences of pro-life legislation while not having good reason to
Right.
that
So
Okay, so then he clarifies once again. He says, okay, so what you're saying here is this. And when you do this, this allows you to get more information from the other person. And in some cases, they can hang themselves or they can make themselves look really, really good, right? It really depends on where their line of thinking lies. What information have they used to make a particular, to come to a particular conclusion? Let's continue.
legislation in the first place, along with being anti-IVF and anti-LGBTQ plus, are going to be for good reasons.
right. So okay, so let's look at Democrats then.
Okay.
Are you going to say that Democrats are anti-family because they elected someone like Bill Clinton and he cheated on Hillary with Monica Lewinsky? Like, is that because I think if you are going to say that Trump makes the Republicans anti-family, you're going to have to say the same thing about Democrats and some of the candidates that they've elected.
Okay, so this is perfect. So he asked a couple questions. We get some clarification. We get Dean to say, a little bit more about his line of reasoning and where he's coming from. And then the man can say, all right, now we have to apply this to your side as well. Because a lot of times in these debates with politics, it really ends up being your side versus my side, right? And one person is trying to make the other side, demonize the side and say, oh, all conservatives are terrible people or all liberals are terrible people. And so now what he's saying, this man in black, in the black shirt, is saying, hey, okay, by your very standard, you have to accept that this plays out on your side as well. Because remember, the debate topic here, or the resolution, is conservatives don't care about family values. So he has to try to identify, okay, why is it that you believe conservatives do or do not care about family values? And does it apply to your side as well? If it applies to your side, then guess what? This is not really much of an argument. And I'm seeing here, let's see here. It looks like Liberty Dad, YouTube took your stream down, but you're still on Rumble. Well, first time for everything. So anyway, we'll continue on, and that's just the way it is.
Not necessarily, right? I think if like Bill Clinton.
Hey, let him talk. Let him talk.
All right, this is great right here. So I actually, this might be one of my more favorite moments. Right now, I get it. We all say something and everybody kind of laughs, but then he says, hey, hold up, let the man speak. Right? He's trying to ensure that there's a civil discourse here. And again, if we want to go somewhere meaningful in a debate, then we should ensure that we maintain civil discourse. All right.
When Democrats voted for Bill Clinton, did they know, like, because they had a crystal ball, that he was going to end up cheating on his wife with Monica Lewinsky?
No, they didn't.
But when you're going to vote for Trump in November, do you have the prior knowledge that he cheated on 3 of his wives? He sexualized a little girl on an
Yes,
interview
but
with
also
Steve Gaspar in
Democrats
1992,
voted
and
not to impeach him.
All right. So this is great. So Dean now responds and says, okay, well, let's evaluate your question. and he kind of like responds with a question, dubious whether you necessarily want to do that, but I think it worked out fine in this particular case. So now Dean says, okay, well, wait a minute. Could you have known that was going to happen? And the man says, no, never be afraid to acknowledge if your opponent has a good point. Because when you're debating a topic, the likelihood is that they will have a good point. Think of fencing. Fencing, you're going back and forth, and sometimes the other opponent, they get a good hit. Now, the other opponent, like if I'm fencing somebody else, that opponent might get 4 or 5 good hits. I don't know the specific numbers and all the rules, but they may get more than one good hit. That's okay. It's still possible that I could win the match in its entirety. So never be afraid to acknowledge when somebody makes a good point, because at the end of the day, they could still be wrong on the general idea that they're discussing. They just might have a few good points along the way, which is a value add to the conversation. Let's continue.
Right? So aren't all the Democrats in the House that voted to not impeach him now anti-family?
Well, first of all, I gave you 4 considerations why I'd say that the conservative voter base is going to be anti-family. That's going to be one. But I would say that, yes.
Well,
the
right. We have
Democrats
to
in
look
Congress-
at one argument at a time.
Okay, so I like this. He's being very cognizant of the conversation. He's like, look, I get it. You've got a whole bunch of reasons. Let's address one. Because where people go wrong is, and it's very natural. It's very natural if you and I are debating for me to say, oh yeah, well, what about this, this, and this, and this, all these reasons. And then for you to say, okay, that's great. You've got 5 reasons. Let's focus on this one. Because if you get caught up in trying to address all 5 at the same time, then the conversation isn't really going to go anywhere. So you need to make sure that you focus on one particular element. All right, let's continue.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that, yeah, this alone is necessary in saying that all conservatives are anti-family. I'd say it's one of the considerations. I would say that, yeah, like the Democrats in Congress that didn't elect to impeach Bill Clinton probably didn't do the right thing there. But then additionally, I'd say even when we look at legislation from the Democratic platform versus the Republican one, I mean, the Democratic platform, wants to federally protect all women and girls' right to act.
Okay, so now he's forced Dean to acknowledge that, hey, on the candidate level, which is, like that's how they started. On the candidate level, there is some equal criticism to be applied to both sides. And so now Dean is like, okay, well, now if we look at the platform, right? So now he has to shift to another argument because the one that he had simply wasn't working. Let's continue.
Access abortion, right? That's going to make sure that unwanted kids aren't placed into unready households. The Democrat platform wants to raise the child tax credit to $6,000.
Right. So, I mean, you're being pushed on this argument, and then you're just bringing up other arguments. You're not actually addressing my claims. But additionally, I don't think you can say, oh, just because I'm going to vote for this candidate because I like their policies means I'm therefore anti-family. And I think you have a lot of Republicans, myself included, that are very pro-family and that, want those things and are disgusted by Trump's previous behavior. But
okay, so let's pause it again. And this is where all the questioning up front benefits you, because now that you've put these questions, now that the man in black has put out these questions, he has gotten Dean to make some concessions. He's gotten Dean to explore, to explain a little bit more about his idea. And so now he can start addressing and saying, this is why I think your argument doesn't work. It doesn't work because it makes a lot of assumptions about me and many other Republicans. And it assumes that just because I'm voting for this guy, that I accept and agree with all of his past behaviors, which is not the case.
That's not our voting philosophy. Our voting philosophy is based off of policies and what we think are going to be best for the country. That doesn't mean we don't have disagreements with Trump and his personal life. Yeah. And I think with literally any candidate, you're going to have disagreements on different policies that they like and different personal behaviors and actions in their life. Yeah. That does not mean that therefore I'm anti-family because I'm going to vote for Donald Trump.
Okay, so that was the perfect response. And the perfect way to address this is to come out and say, okay, look, let me ask you a few questions. We're going to get to the bottom of what do you mean by this? And then we're going to walk our way through it. And he's respectful the whole way. Like he wasn't, arguing hard at the guy or, being a jerk or interrupting him constantly. He was just like, okay, let's ask some questions. Then we're going to walk through it. And then he circles back to the original resolution. He says, look, I don't think your resolution actually works. I think it's got some flaws, some serious flaws to it. Yes, I am supporting this particular person, but you cannot, and using the reasons that he provided, you cannot assume that because of my support here that it means all these other things, because it's very possible that I'm supporting a particular candidate that I still have some disagreements with, which you have to acknowledge. So I think it was a great exchange. It was probably my favorite exchange between, in terms of being productive. It was my favorite exchange. There were some other exchanges that I thought were good for different reasons, but by far that's my favorite. And I will probably do that tomorrow. We will see. I got to see if apparently I'm getting in trouble with YouTube. I don't really know. So I'll be looking at that as soon as I get off the show here. But this was my kind of evaluation of this particular episode. I thought it was very interesting. I think there was a lot that could be learned. If you're interested in debating other people and you're trying to get people to understand your ideas for the better, I think there's a lot to be learned from this. It is an hour and 45-minute show. So, make sure that you make a couple cups of coffee so that you have, plenty of time to sit down and really focus on listening and learning. With that said, I want to wrap this up by saying that when you're debating, the more topics that are brought up in a quick fashion, the more likely that you're going to walk away learning nothing from the other person. That goes for both sides. Focus on one topic, find common ground. And when you get to a disagreement, then focus on making your various points along that common ground. This will allow the other person to recognize, hey, we did find common ground here, but we disagreed here. And they're more likely to hear out what you have to say. They are more likely to walk away and think about the words that you've said. And ultimately, is that not the goal? Is the goal when you're debating somebody really to get them to rethink their positions? And there's a strategy and a good way to do it, and there's a bad way to do it. All right, folks, thank you for watching. Hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Apologies it went so long. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Be sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com if it's still up. We'll find out here in a moment. Or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you're there, please leave me a comment. Let me know how I'm doing. Last but not least, remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time.